Two black siblings boarded a flight home to celebrate their biggest dreams coming true. But minutes after taking their seats, a flight attendant demanded they move for a white passenger's comfort. What he didn't know? One call would ground the entire plane, trigger a national investigation, and turn a quiet flight into a battle for dignity seen by millions. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The morning began with a glimmer of celebration, a quiet kind of triumph that threaded itself through the crisp air of downtown Seattle. Adrienne Lewis, an ambitious 36-year-old attorney, pulled her hair into a loose knot as she stared at her reflection in the small hotel mirror. Today was supposed to be simple, a flight home to Savannah to share life-changing news with the family who had built her dreams from the ground up, sacrifice by sacrifice. In her heart, Adrienne carried the golden weight of a partnership offer from one of the nation's top law firms, a dream her parents had worked double shifts and clipped coupons to make possible. Across the room, her younger brother, Julian Lewis, fiddled nervously with his watch. At 30, Julian was a talented music teacher who had recently accepted a prestigious post at a new performing arts academy. This flight wasn't just a journey back to their childhood home. It was a crossing into the next chapter of their lives, a culmination of everything their family had fought for across generations. "You think Mom's gonna cry?" Julian asked, breaking the silence as he zipped up his backpack. Adrienne smiled at him through the mirror. "You know she will. Probably before we even get through the arrivals gate." Their laughter filled the small room, bright and light, completely unaware of the storm that awaited them just a few hours ahead. The airport bustled as usual, a symphony of clattering luggage wheels and overhead announcements that blurred into the rhythm of early travel. The siblings navigated TSA with the ease of seasoned travelers, joked about how Julian always forgot to remove his belt and grabbed overpriced coffee near their gate. Everything felt normal, safe. It wasn't until they boarded Flight 432 to Savannah that the first crack appeared in their perfect day. Row 14, seats A and B, window and middle. They slid into their spots easily, laughing about who got stuck in the middle this time. Adrienne pulled a paperback novel from her bag, while Julian popped in his earbuds, mouthing along to a song only he could hear. The aisle seat remained empty, but neither gave it much thought. Planes filled up last minute all the time. Then came the voice. "Excuse me." The word, crisp and commanding, sliced through their quiet bubble. Adrienne looked up to see a flight attendant standing over them. Her uniform was immaculate, but there was a tightness around her mouth that made Adrienne instantly wary. The attendant's name tag read, "Mr. Harris," and though he wore a polite smile, something about his posture hinted at tension. "We have a bit of a seating issue," he said. "A passenger needs to sit here with her companion. Would one of you mind moving to the rear of the plane? It would really help us out." Adrienne blinked. She exchanged a quick glance with Julian, whose face had gone still. "Is there a reason you're asking us?" she asked carefully, her lawyer's instincts flaring awake. Mr. Harris hesitated for half a breath too long. You're seated together, and it would be easier to accommodate single passengers elsewhere. Before Adrienne could respond, a woman appeared behind the attendant, a blonde woman in her late 50s, elegantly dressed, clutching a designer handbag. Her expression flickered with irritation the moment she saw the siblings occupying the seats she apparently desired. I paid extra for this seat, the woman said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. I shouldn't have to sit apart because someone else can't be flexible. Julian slowly removed his earbuds. His face remained neutral, but Adrienne could feel the rigidity in his shoulders. We booked our seats weeks ago, Adrienne said, her voice even but edged with steel. We're traveling together for a family event. I'm afraid we're not able to switch. The attendant's smile faltered. Please, ma'am, it's just a few rows back. The phrase echoed strangely in Adrienne's ears. Just a few rows back. Just move back. A lifetime of memories flooded her. The whispered comments in grocery stores, the extra eyes following her in boutiques, the casual insinuations that she should always be the one to move, to yield, to accept less. The woman in the aisle made a sharp noise of impatience. Honestly, it's always something. The implication hung heavy in the cabin air. It wasn't just a seat. It was the weight of all the unspoken biases, the 1,000 invisible cuts that Black Americans endured daily. Adrienne felt the anger rise, hot and immediate, but she swallowed it down. This wasn't just about them anymore. Every set of eyes nearby was watching, waiting to see if they would comply, if they would stay quiet and disappear. Julian leaned in, his voice low. Sis, it's not worth it. Let's just move. No, Adrienne said firmly, her heart hammering in her chest. We paid for these seats. We stay. Mr. Harris's lips thinned. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to involve the captain. Please do, Adrienne said, her voice like glass. For a moment, time stretched thin. It felt as if the entire plane held its breath. Julian reached for his phone, dialing a number he had memorized but never thought he'd have to call. He looked Mr. Harris squarely in the eye as he spoke. Yes, I'd like to report a discriminatory incident on Flight 432, departing from Seattle to Savannah. My sister and I are being singled out and asked to move without just cause. The attendant paled. Passengers leaned out into the aisle, whispers crackling like static. And just like that, a spark had been struck in the pressurized cabin. A spark that would ignite a chain of events none of them could have foreseen. As Mr. Harris retreated toward the cockpit, Adrienne reached for Julian's hand, squeezing it hard. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The moment the captain's voice boomed through the intercom, the tension in the cabin became palpable. The flight attendant's hurried whispers ceased, replaced by the soft hum of murmurs and the shuffle of restless feet. Adrienne couldn't quite place the emotion that settled over her. Was it fear? Defiance? Or something deeper? Something that gnawed at her gut, urging her to remain vigilant, to stay composed no matter what came next? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The captain's voice crackled, his tone flat but professional. We are experiencing a slight delay while we sort out some seating arrangements. Please remain seated as we work to resolve this as quickly as possible. Adrienne could feel the eyes of every passenger upon her, some sympathetic, some curious, others judgmental. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, and for a brief instant, she wondered how long it would be before this moment defined her. Behind them, the woman, Miss Carrington, stood in the aisle, now with her arms crossed tightly. She exuded an air of entitlement, her facial expressions constantly flickering between indignation and disbelief. She hadn't anticipated resistance, not from anyone, let alone from a pair of black siblings traveling together. Adrienne's mind raced. Had she ever been a part of something this absurd? A flight meant to be a celebration of family, of accomplishments, had turned into a battleground for her dignity. She could already hear the familiar echoes of her father's voice. "You're going to have to work twice as hard, Adrienne. You'll have to rise above the petty things people try to hold you down with." But this wasn't petty. Number It was something much more insidious, something deeper that Adrienne had fought against for years. Julian, his fingers gripping the armrest with a nervous energy, looked over at his sister. He knew her better than anyone. She was a strategist, calm in moments of chaos, but even he could sense the simmering frustration in her. He placed a hand on hers, the only gesture that could offer them both some comfort in this tense moment. "Let's just call it in," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "We don't have to do this alone." Adrienne nodded, taking a deep breath as she dialed the number that had, for years, been reserved for extreme situations. The phone rang, each second stretching longer than the last. She could feel the weight of her call, the risk involved, the attention it would attract. She hadn't expected this, but now that she was here, she knew she couldn't back down. "Yes. Hello. I'm Adrienne Lewis," she said when the line clicked. "I need to report an incident of discrimination. My brother and I are being asked to switch seats by the flight attendants, and it's becoming clear to me that it's because of the color of our skin." The words left her mouth, simple and unambiguous, but her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't have to say more. She knew the weight of the request was clear. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone to her ear, waiting for the response on the other end. As she spoke, the flight attendants shifted uncomfortably, their glances flitting between her and Julian. Miss Carrington remained silent for the moment, but Adrienne could sense the anger building inside her. The flight attendants, who had been so eager to accommodate the woman, now looked unsure. They'd been caught in a situation that had made them all uneasy. Julian's voice broke into her thoughts. "You think they'll back down?" "I'm not sure," Adrienne replied softly, her voice unwavering. "But this time, they will have to." It was strange, the emotions that took root in the pit of her stomach. Here they were, on a flight headed toward what was meant to be a celebration of family. A flight that, for once, felt like a gift for the long years of sacrifice. And yet, a simple request to stay seated, to hold their ground, had ignited an invisible war that neither of them had anticipated. "Is the captain coming?" Julian asked. "Yes. They'll speak with us directly," Adrienne said, barely able to contain her frustration. The door to the cockpit opened with a soft whoosh, and the flight attendant from earlier, Mr. Harris, reappeared. He stood at the front of the cabin, his stance tight, eyes scanning the passengers. A second attendant, a younger woman with dark curly hair and a concerned expression, followed him down the aisle. Adrienne recognized her as Jasmine, the one who had been there earlier, but had not involved herself in the situation directly. As they approached, Mr. Harris cleared his throat, his attempt at composure failing to mask the discomfort radiating from him. "The captain has asked to speak with you, Ms. Lewis, and you too, Mr. Lewis. If you'd like, you may follow me." Adrian met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "We'll go, but we want this documented. Everything." Mr. Harris nodded slowly, his face flushed. "Understood." As they made their way toward the front of the plane, the atmosphere shifted. People were watching, quiet now, expectant. Adrienne could feel the collective energy building, that strange combination of judgment and curiosity. They were all passengers in a system too familiar with racial inequality, but how many of them were truly willing to witness it in full? The cockpit door opened, and the captain, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s, stood there. His name tag read Reynolds. His voice was calm, though there was an undercurrent of tension. "Ms. Lewis, Mr. Lewis, I'm Captain Reynolds. I understand there's been some confusion regarding seating arrangements." "Confusion is putting it mildly," Adrienne replied, her voice cool but assertive. "We are being asked to give up our seats when other options are available, and it seems to be rooted in something that has nothing to do with the seating chart. This feels like a racial issue, Captain. I need to know if I'm wrong." The captain shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I want to get to the bottom of this. I promise you that." Adrienne held her ground, knowing full well that what came next could change everything. The thing with prejudice, the thing with discrimination, was that it never stayed quiet for long. It always leaked out, slowly at first, but it always found a way to surface. And when it did, it would have to be confronted. The captain spoke again, his tone more resolute. "We're going to address this now, but I want to be clear that no one will be treated unfairly under my command. You have my word." For a split second, Adrienne felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken with such conviction on a subject that meant so much. The tension in the cabin had shifted. It was no longer just a matter of seating arrangements. It had become a matter of justice, a moment in time that would define how every person aboard would confront their own understanding of equality. But it wasn't over. It had only just begun. And Adrienne was ready. The minutes felt like hours as Adrienne stood at the front of the plane, eyes locked onto the captain's with an unwavering intensity. The tension was palpable, each heartbeat resonating in her chest as she tried to make sense of the events unfolding around her. The soft murmur of the other passengers was the only sound filling the cabin, but it seemed to blur into the background as she focused entirely on the matter at hand. Her dignity, her right to exist without prejudice, and the silent war being fought at 30,000 feet. Captain Reynolds, standing tall and calm, looked between her and Xavier, his expression both professional and deeply concerned. "Ms. Lewis, Mr. Lewis, I need you to understand that this is not something I take lightly. This flight, your comfort, your dignity, matters to me, and I want to ensure that we handle this the right way." Adrienne nodded, but inside, she felt the slow burn of frustration. The words were reassuring, but they were also all too familiar. Promises had been made before, in less consequential circumstances, but the reality often failed to meet the expectation. This moment, however, was different. The ground beneath them wasn't just metaphorical anymore. It was very real, and the weight of it had settled on Adrienne's shoulders. "I'm not sure what more I can say." Adrienne's voice remained steady. but the quiet anger underneath was undeniable. We were asked to switch seats. We've tried to comply, twice now, but each time it felt like we were being targeted for something that had nothing to do with seating arrangements. Xavier, who had been eerily quiet until now, finally spoke, his voice betraying a trace of emotion. It's more than just moving seats. We're not blind to what's going on. We know what it feels like when people make assumptions based on the color of your skin. The captain's face softened at the words, and for a moment, Adrian saw something other than a professional mask, an understanding. It was small, but it was there. He didn't speak right away, his eyes scanning over them, as if weighing what had been said. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I'm going to make a call, and I want you to know. We will resolve this, Captain Reynolds said, his tone resolute but measured. I'm taking this seriously. Please, remain here. As the captain left to speak with someone, presumably higher-ups, Adrian and Xavier exchanged a look. It was a look that said everything they hadn't yet voiced. The exhaustion of fighting this fight, the disbelief that it had to be fought at all, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see their worth without conditions. The plane hummed quietly in the background as the minutes stretched on. It was a strange silence, almost oppressive. The weight of the moment was heavy, not only on Adrian and Xavier, but on the passengers around them. It was as though the entire cabin held its breath, waiting for what would come next. A few moments later, Captain Reynolds returned, his face more serious than before, and the flight attendants who had been at the heart of this conflict followed him closely. Adrienne felt her pulse quicken as they approached. They were bringing the verdict with them. What would it be? Was this going to be yet another failure to address the discrimination they faced, or would something finally shift? The captain stopped before them, his eyes unwavering. I've spoken with the airline's headquarters, and they're aware of the situation. We've agreed on a solution, but I want to be clear. We will not proceed until this matter is resolved fairly. No passenger should ever feel uncomfortable or disrespected on this flight. We are grounded until we figure this out. Adrienne couldn't help but feel a wave of disbelief and relief flood over her. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the smallest amount of triumph. The plane was grounded, not just physically, but in its moral compass as well. This was no longer about seating assignments. This was about standing up for what was right, even in the face of a system that had worked so hard to keep those like her and Xavier in their place. We'll wait, Captain, Xavier spoke up, his voice steady now, no trace of the nervousness that had accompanied him earlier. We'll wait as long as it takes. As the flight attendants began to move through the cabin again, ensuring that the passengers remained calm and in their seats, Adrian and Xavier stayed standing. The weight of their collective decision had settled heavily on them. But in that moment, there was also a sense of purpose, a belief that perhaps this was more than just a flight. It was a chance to change something, to make their voices heard in a space where they were usually silenced. The plane wasn't going anywhere, not until the issue was addressed. The crew would wait. The passengers would wait. But Adrian and Xavier knew that something far more significant than a simple flight was hanging in the balance now. What had started as an inconvenience for one passenger had now become a turning point for many. The call that grounded the plane had become a call for change. The tension in the cabin thickened as Adrienne and Xavier stood silently, their decision to remain grounded having already drawn the attention of the remaining passengers. This was no longer just a disagreement over seating. It had evolved into something much larger, a stand against a system that had often treated them as invisible, a reminder of the quiet battles fought by people of color every day. Captain Reynolds had left them with one promise, that he would take immediate action. Adrienne felt the weight of that promise as she looked around the plane. The murmurs of passengers had slowed to hushed whispers, but their eyes were all on her and Xavier. It was as if they were waiting, too, for the result of this standoff, unsure of which direction the outcome would fall. Minutes passed like hours. The stillness in the cabin was interrupted only by the soft rustling of magazines and the occasional cough. Adrienne could feel the quiet support of Xavier standing next to her, his presence grounding her. She knew this moment was larger than the two of them. It was about making a statement, about ensuring that what had happened to them was never ignored again. The flight attendants, who had been involved in the confrontation earlier, had remained mostly quiet after the captain's departure, their faces a mix of concern and uncertainty. Their role in this moment was now clear. They were participants in a situation that had gone beyond routine, and they would have to reckon with the consequences. When Captain Reynolds returned, his face was no longer as calm as before. His steps were measured, and his expression was grave, reflecting the seriousness of the conversation he had just had with airline headquarters. Standing before Adrienne and Xavier, he addressed them directly. "I've spoken to my superiors," Captain Reynolds began, his voice now lower, almost as if he were acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "And I'm afraid this is no longer something we can resolve without a full investigation. This issue is now being handled by our legal and corporate teams. You have every right to feel how you do, and I need to assure you that we are taking immediate action." Adrienne's heart raced at the captain's words. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew that the ball was now in motion. This was not just about a seat swap anymore. It was about accountability, about a system that allowed discrimination to go unchecked for too long. They had reached a point where the corporation could no longer ignore the underlying issues of bias, and it was no longer just a minor inconvenience. It had become a battle for recognition and dignity. Xavier stepped forward slightly, his tone firm yet controlled. "I appreciate that you're taking the steps to investigate this, but let's be clear about something. This wasn't just an isolated incident. We've both experienced this type of subtle discrimination before. On the street, in restaurants, in other public spaces. It's the kind of thing you brush off in your day-to-day life. But when it happens like this, in a place where we're supposed to be safe, it's different. It's not something we can just ignore." The captain nodded thoughtfully, clearly understanding the depth of Xavier's words. He turned briefly to the flight attendant standing behind him, Sandra, and the other crew members who had been caught in the middle of this situation. Sandra shifted her gaze nervously, as if unsure of how to respond. "We'll be following up with you," Captain Reynolds continued, his eyes never leaving Xavier. "You have my word that this matter will be treated seriously, and if any of our policies or actions have contributed to this, we will make the necessary changes." Adrienne's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. I appreciate the words, but words aren't enough. We need action. We need to ensure that this doesn't happen again, that this doesn't become just another conversation with no real change behind it. The captain seemed to absorb this, his face softening with the acknowledgement that this was no longer just a matter of customer service. It was a matter of justice. I understand, Ms. Lewis, he said quietly, and I promise you, this will not be ignored. We'll be making the necessary adjustments. The flight attendants exchanged glances, unsure of how to continue. But one of them, Jasmine, finally spoke up. I didn't witness everything that happened earlier, but I did see the way the situation was handled. I'll be honest with you. There were mistakes made. We're here to serve you, all of you, with respect. And I think it's time we start talking about how we can do better, not just as individuals, but as a team. Jasmine's words hung in the air for a moment, and Adrienne felt a small glimmer of hope. The crew was willing to acknowledge the mistakes. It was a start, but it was clear that there was still a long way to go. Discrimination, in its more insidious forms, couldn't be erased with one conversation or a promise made in the heat of the moment. It would take action, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Captain Reynolds nodded at Jasmine's words. I agree, he said, his tone shifting slightly. This won't be the last time we have these discussions. We need to confront these issues head on, especially in a system where power dynamics often go unnoticed until they're too late. The rest of the crew remained silent, but their expressions had changed. There was no denying it now. This situation had forced them to see the truth of what had happened. They couldn't simply continue on without making the necessary changes to their approach, both in how they served passengers and how they handled conflict. As the captain left to begin the formal investigation, the cabin remained eerily quiet. Xavier and Adrienne exchanged a look, a wordless communication that spoke volumes. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, they felt as though they had not only been heard, but seen. In a world that so often overlooked the voices of people like them, this was the first step towards something greater. They had forced the issue into the open. Now, they would wait for the investigation, for the corporate response, and for the real change to begin. But one thing was clear. They would not back down, and they would not allow their humanity to be denied, not on this flight, and not in any other part of their lives. As the minutes stretched on, the plane remained grounded, and for once, it felt as though they were all grounded in a shared moment of realization. It was not just about the seats anymore. It was about standing up for the right to be treated with dignity, no matter where you were, no matter who you were. And that was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The hum of the engines was a steady reminder that despite everything that had transpired, they were still in the air. But for Xavier and Adrienne, the atmosphere inside the plane felt different now. The confrontation, the investigation, the promises made, they lingered in their minds, but there was a sense of quiet resolution settling over them. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Xavier leaned back in his seat, his eyes closed for a moment, allowing the weight of the situation to wash over him. He felt a subtle shift within himself. The anger, the frustration that had fueled their stand earlier, was slowly giving way to a quiet sense of calm. They had made their point. They had been heard. Now, the healing could begin. Adrienne, looking out the window at the vast expanse of clouds beneath them, felt something similar, a release. She was still processing everything, but she knew that standing up for herself and her brother had been a powerful act. The fight wasn't over, but it was no longer just about this flight. It was about the future, the lessons learned, the courage found in moments of adversity. The conversation between them drifted into a more personal space, away from the tension and the discomfort. They spoke about their parents, their childhood, the future. In the midst of everything, they realized something profound. Their bond was unshakable, their unity, their shared experience, a strength that nothing could diminish. In that moment, high above the earth, with a clear sky stretched out before them, Adrian and Xavier both felt a deep sense of peace. There was no instant solution, no magical fix for the issues that they had just faced. But as they sat together in the quiet of the cabin, they knew this: healing was possible, even at 35,000 feet. As the final moments of the flight passed, Xavier and Adrienne found themselves reflecting on what had transpired. What began as a simple flight, a routine journey, had evolved into something much larger, a confrontation with prejudice and an unexpected call to action. The moment when the flight attendant had demanded they switch seats had set off a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. They had been challenged, questioned, and tested. But in the end, they had stood their ground, not just for their own dignity, but for the dignity of everyone who has ever been made to feel less than. Through this experience, Xavier and Adrienne came to realize that the battle for equality and respect doesn't always present itself in grand, obvious ways. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments of personal confrontation, in the moments when your voice trembles as you fight to assert your worth. They learn that it's not enough to simply endure the wrongs done to us. Instead, we must speak out, confront injustice head on, and demand the respect and equality we deserve. The investigation that followed, the uncomfortable moments of reflection, and even the confrontation with the flight crew became a lesson in humanity. They understood that everyone, regardless of their role in society, has a responsibility to do better, to recognize their biases, and to change. The healing that began during the flight was not just a personal one for them, but one that symbolized the broader journey toward a more just world. It was a reminder that standing up, while difficult, is always worth it. The story of Xavier and Adrienne is one of resilience, courage, and transformation. It's a story about taking action when faced with discrimination, about the power of speaking up, and about the importance of doing the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable. The lesson from their journey is clear. We must never allow ourselves to be silenced. Every voice, every act of defiance, no matter how small, is a step toward the change we want to see in the world. Now, as you reflect on their story, ask yourself, when was the last time you stood up for what was right? When did you challenge the status quo? It's not just about big moments like the one Xavier and Adrienne experienced. It's about how we live every day, how we treat others, how we check our own biases, and how we push for a better future for ourselves and those around us. If you found value in this story, if you've been inspired by the courage and resilience of Xavier and Adrienne, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps fuel the creation of more meaningful content, and it encourages us to continue bringing you stories that matter. Stay with us as we keep exploring the power of truth, justice, and the human spirit. Thank you for being part of this journey.